The student, still feeling confident in their own understanding, might reply by saying, "Well, I do not just have an idea of what is good, I actually put it into practice in my daily life." Epictetus nods and agrees that yes, the student does try to use this knowledge in specific, everyday situations. The student then pushes further, insisting, "And what is more, I use it correctly." This, Epictetus points out, is exactly the crux of the problem. This is precisely the point where mere opinions become a serious issue. He explains that we all start with these basic, innate ideas that we take completely for granted, but we inevitably get into arguments and conflicts whenever we start applying them incorrectly to the real world. Think about it, he says. If we were truly born with not just these innate ideas, but also with the complete, flawless knowledge of exactly how they should be applied in every single situation, then we would all be perfect, fully enlightened wise men from the very moment we were born. And we clearly are not. So Epictetus challenges the student. He says, "Right now, you seem to think that you already possess this extra specialized knowledge of how to properly apply these general preconceptions to particular, specific instances in your life. But how exactly did you come by this knowledge?" The student might defensively answer, "Well, it is just my opinion." Epictetus immediately counters this by pointing out that someone else out there has a completely different opinion, and that other person also firmly believes that they are the one applying their preconceptions correctly. He asks the student if this is true, and the student has to admit, "I guess so." Epictetus then draws the logical conclusion. If two people clash and disagree completely over how to apply these basic preconceptions, it is logically impossible for both of them to be using them correctly at the same time. The student readily agrees to this. Epictetus presses on, asking the student if they can come up with any better tool or aid for applying these ideas than just their own personal opinion. To illustrate his point, he brings up an extreme example. He says that even a lunatic acts entirely in accordance with his own personal opinion of what he thinks is good. But Epictetus asks, can a lunatic's opinion really function as an adequate guide for living? The student obviously answers, no. Therefore, Epictetus urges, we have to move beyond just relying on simple opinion. There has to be something better out there. And this realization, he explains, is exactly where philosophy begins. The starting point of philosophy is when we look around and realize that people simply cannot agree among themselves. Seeing this, we go in search of the root source of their disagreement. Over time, as we study and reflect, we come to scorn and completely dismiss simple, unfounded opinions, and we start actively looking for a reliable way to determine if a specific opinion is actually right or wrong. Ultimately, our focus narrows down to finding an objective standard that we can consistently invoke. Epictetus compares this to the way we invented the physical scale to accurately measure weights, or the way a carpenter devised a straight rule to definitively distinguish what is straight from what is crooked. Finding that kind of standard for our thoughts, he says, is the true beginning of philosophy. He asks again, are everyone's opinions correct? How could they possibly be, especially when so many of them are in direct conflict with one another? A stubborn person might reply, all right, maybe not everyone's opinions are correct, but our opinions definitely are. To this, Epictetus simply asks, why ours? Why should our opinions be right instead of the opinions of the Syrians or the Egyptians? Why should my personal opinions be any more valid than those of any random person picked off the street? The answer, of course, is that there is no good reason. Therefore, the mere fact that someone strongly holds this or that opinion is never going to be enough to make it true. It is just like how we would never just trust a person's word when dealing with weights and measures in the marketplace. If someone says a bag of grain weighs 10 pounds, we do not just take their opinion for it. We use a scale. In the physical world, we have developed objective standards. So, Epictetus asks, is there really no standard for our inner lives beyond just our personal opinions? Is it possible that humanity's most important values are the only things that are going to be left vague, messy, and entirely subjective? No, he insists, there absolutely must be a standard. So our job is to hunt for it. And once we have finally found it, we must commit ourselves to never making a single move or a single choice without directly referencing that standard. Epictetus says that discovering this standard is the ultimate antidote to the madness that comes from relying exclusively on mere opinion as our criterion for truth. From that moment on, we can start with our familiar, innate preconceptions, define them clearly, and then proceed to apply them to particular objects and events in a calm, methodical manner. To demonstrate how this works, Epictetus asks the student to name a subject for discussion right now. The student suggests the topic of pleasure. Epictetus agrees and says, "All right, let us put pleasure to the test. Let us lay it on the philosophical scales." He starts by stating a basic premise. For something to be truly good, it must be something that we can completely rely on and trust. The student agrees. Epictetus then asks, "Well, can we ever truly trust anything that just comes and goes?" The student replies, "No." Epictetus then asks the crucial question, "And is pleasure constant? Does it stay forever?" The student admits, "No, it does not." Therefore, Epictetus concludes, you must take pleasure off the scale and banish it entirely from the realm of things that are truly good. But Epictetus adds, just in case you are not too sharp and somehow miss the logic the first time around, let us try a different test. He asks, something that is truly good should be a justifiable source of pride, correct? And the student, following the logic, answers, yes. Following up on that, Epictetus asks a second probing question. Can any rational person truly take deep, lasting pride in a fleeting momentary pleasure? He quickly warns the student, please do not answer yes to that, because if you do, I will have to conclude that you barely deserve to be regarded on the same level as a mindless beast of burden, like a mule or an ox. True human pride, he implies, comes from lasting moral worth, not a quick passing thrill. And with that, Epictetus concludes his point about standards. He says that this methodical process of testing things against an objective standard is exactly how all things should be weighed, and it is how all philosophical disagreements should ultimately be settled. We must first establish these firm standards. The whole aim and purpose of philosophy, he explains, is to rigorously test our ideas and firmly set these universal standards. Once that heavy lifting is done, the truly wise person is advised not just to admire the standards, but to immediately make use of these philosophical findings and apply them directly to their everyday life. At this point, Epictetus shifts gears and begins a new discourse on the art of argumentation and how we ought to engage with others. He starts by making a somewhat self-deprecating observation about his fellow Stoic students. He admits that the philosophers of their school have given them very precise, detailed instructions on exactly what they need to learn in order to practice logical argument. They have studied the theory perfectly. But he points out, when it comes down to actually putting those logical skills into practice correctly in a real, particular, face-to-face situation with a normal human being, they find they have absolutely no practical experience at all. To prove his point, he says, just take one of us highly trained students and give us a completely random, everyday person to engage in a dialogue. What happens? We completely freeze up. We do not know what to do with him. We might start by asking the person a few philosophical questions, but the moment we do not get the precise, textbook answers we have come to expect from our classroom training, we completely lose our patience. We throw our hands up in frustration and immediately resort to mocking, ridiculing, or even verbally abusing the poor person. We dismiss them arrogantly, saying, "Oh, he is just not a philosopher. It simply is not possible to engage a person like that in an intelligent dialogue." Epictetus finds this attitude completely unacceptable. He uses a helpful analogy to show why. He says, think about a professional guide. When a guide meets up with someone who is wandering around completely lost, What is his normal, ordinary reaction? The guide's job is to gently and clearly direct the lost person back onto the right path. A good guide does not mock the lost traveler, malign him for being confused, and then simply turn on his heel and arrogantly walk away. So Epictetus tells his students, you must act like the guide. If you patiently and clearly lead someone to the truth, step by step, you will find that almost anyone is capable of following you. But as long as you are failing to clearly point the truth out to them, you have absolutely no right to make fun of them for not seeing it. Instead of mocking their ignorance, you need to turn your attention inward and be keenly aware of the flaws and impatience in your own teaching methods that you still need to work on. To show them the gold standard of how to do this, Epictetus tells them to consider how the great philosopher Socrates behaved when he engaged with people. Socrates had a unique way of conversing. He would gently but firmly compel whomever he was speaking with to clearly voice their own views and assumptions. For Socrates, one single person to talk to was always enough. He did not need a crowd or an audience. This focused approach is exactly why Socrates could famously say that everyone else in the world could go hang for all he cared, because he was only genuinely interested in what the specific person he was talking to right then had to say. Socrates would say, "No one else's opinion or vote counts with me in this moment, except for the vote of my partner in this dialogue." Once Socrates had his partner engaged, he would carefully and methodically lay out all the logical implications of their stated views so incisively that, regardless of who his partners were, they would eventually be forced to admit their own logical inconsistencies and respectfully back off from their flawed arguments. For instance, Socrates might ask, "Is a man who is completely racked by envy ever truly happy?" The person would naturally reply, "Not at all. Envious people are absolutely miserable." Then Socrates would gently probe further, "Are they miserable over something bad? But whoever heard of someone feeling envy over something bad?" By doing this, he skillfully led his partner to realize and admit that envy is actually a type of pain that is specifically provoked by the presence of something good. He would continue, would someone ever be envious over something that they cared absolutely nothing for? The partner would answer, "Obviously not." This, Epictetus explains, is exactly what Socrates would do. He would quit an argument only after he had fully fleshed out an idea and thoroughly explored all of its real-world implications. He would never take the lazy academic route. He would never just demand, "Define envy for me." And then, when his interlocutor ventured a genuine definition, arrogantly dismiss them by saying, "Wrong, your definiens is not extensionally equivalent to the definiendum." Those are highly technical, philosophical terms which are completely incomprehensible and off-putting for the average layman. Yet, Epictetus admits with a sigh, we modern students simply cannot resist using exactly those kinds of pretentious words for that very reason. We want to sound smart. As for using plain, everyday language that would enable even a non-philosopher to understand and answer with a simple yes or no, based on his own honest views, well, Epictetus confesses that we simply do not know how to engage anyone on that human level anymore. And what usually happens as a result? We realize that we cannot actually hold a decent conversation, and so we just give up the attempt entirely. At least, those of us who have any discretion or self-awareness give up. Most people, however, are impulsive and proud. Having already committed to the argument, they stubbornly persist, which just creates more and more confusion for themselves and for everyone else involved, until the whole interaction inevitably ends in ugly, mutual recrimination and shouting. Now, that ability to keep things calm is the very first thing Socrates was famous for. He never, ever allowed a productive dialogue to devolve into a petty dispute. He never introduced rudeness or personal invective into a conversation, and he would even patiently put up with the unprovoked insults of others just to avoid a senseless fight. If you want to know just how effective he really was at this, Epictetus suggests, you should go read Xenophon's Symposium. There you will see exactly how many bitter fights Socrates is credited with peacefully resolving. Among the great poets, too, this skill is highly praised. One of the highest forms of compliment they give is conveyed in the famous line praising a man who could cut short a quarrel, however great, simply with his tact and diplomacy. But nowadays, Epictetus warns, engaging in this kind of direct, logical dialogue with strangers is just not a very safe business, especially in a place like Rome. Because, of course, you cannot just do this quietly off in a corner somewhere. You are doing it in public. Imagine the danger. You might find yourself approaching a powerful Roman senator, a man with serious money and influence, and boldly asking him, "Do you know, sir, exactly to whom you have entrusted the daily care of your prized horses?" The senator would probably answer, "Yes, I do." You would then ask, "Is it some random person off the street with absolutely no knowledge of horses?" The senator would scoff, "Of course not." You would continue, "And what about your vast sums of money and your expensive clothes?" The senator would reply, "I certainly do not hand them over to just anyone either." You press on, "And as to your own physical body, you have already found someone highly qualified to entrust with its care." The senator says, "Naturally." You confirm, "An expert obviously in either physical exercise or professional medicine." He answers, "Yes." Then you spring the philosophical trap. You ask, "Are these physical things the possessions that you value most in the world, or have you got something even better than all of them combined?" The senator, intrigued, asks, "And what exactly would that be?" You explain, "I'm talking about the ruling faculty that actually uses all of those other things, the part of you that assigns each of them their proper place and true value." The senator realizes, "You mean the soul," you say. "Good guess." "That is precisely what I mean." The senator agrees, saying, "Absolutely, I think the soul is far and away a much more precious possession than any of those other physical things you just mentioned." Then comes the critical Socratic question. You ask him, "So then, please tell me the specific steps you have taken to properly care for this soul. A man as intelligent as you are, and as politically prominent, surely you would not just casually look on and allow the most prized of all your possessions to be neglected and go to ruin." The senator, cornered by logic, must answer, "No, of course not." So you finally ask, "Well, if you have indeed looked after your soul personally, did you learn how to do it from another wiser person, or did you discover the correct means all by yourself?" Now at this exact point, after you have aggressively questioned this powerful Roman senator about his soul, you run a very serious risk. He is very likely to look at you and say, "What business is that of yours, sir? What are you to me? Why are you interrogating me in the street?" If you decide to ignore his warning and pester him even further about it, he is highly liable to just haul off and punch you right in the nose. Epictetus then makes a humorous, self-deprecating confession to his students. He admits, "I myself was once very keen and eager for this exact sort of public discourse, trying to act like Socrates, right up until the day I met with just exactly such a violent reception." With that amusing warning about the dangers of unsolicited public philosophy, Epictetus moves on to a brand new topic, the subject of human nerves and anxiety. He starts by saying that whenever he sees a person suffering from nervousness or anxiety, he cannot help but think to himself, "Well, honestly, what can this person possibly expect?" The root cause of anxiety is always the same. If this person had simply not set his sights on, and attached his desires to, things that are completely outside of human control, his nervousness would instantly vanish. To illustrate this, Epictetus uses the example of a musician, specifically a lyre player. When this musician is sitting alone in his room, practicing by himself, he is completely relaxed and at ease. But the moment you take that exact same musician and put him out on a stage in front of a live audience, it is a completely different story. Suddenly, he is a nervous wreck. And this happens no matter how incredibly beautiful his singing voice might be, or how masterfully well he actually plays his instrument. Why does this happen? What changes? It happens because when he is on stage, his goal has suddenly shifted. He no longer just wants to perform well, which is something he can control. He now also desperately wants to be well received and applauded by the crowd. And that audience reaction, Epictetus points out, is something that lies entirely outside of his personal control. As far as his actual, technical knowledge of music is concerned, the musician is supremely confident. He knows he is good. The amateur musical opinions of the general public carry absolutely no weight with him when it comes to the technicalities of playing his instrument. Therefore, his intense anxiety does not stem from a lack of musical ability. Instead, it stems from a profound lack of knowledge and a lack of practice in completely different areas of life. What are those areas? Well, Epictetus explains, the musician simply does not know what a human audience actually is. He does not truly understand what the approval or applause from an audience actually amounts to in the grand scheme of things. Even though he has spent years practicing so that he knows well enough how to play absolutely every single note on his guitar flawlessly, from the very lowest string to the very highest, he has completely neglected another kind of study. He has never stopped to analyze the approval of the public. He does not know what that approval actually means, or what real, lasting significance it actually has in life. He has simply made absolutely no effort to learn about human nature and the fleeting nature of fame. Because of this profound ignorance about what actually matters, it is absolutely necessary and inevitable that he is going to get intensely nervous, start shaking, and grow pale with stage fright. Now, Epictetus clarifies, I will not go so far as to say that this man is not a true, talented musician just because I see that he suffers from stage fright. His musical skills are real, but based on his anxiety, I can definitely say one thing about his character. In fact, I can deduce several things about him. I can start by calling him a complete stranger to the world. I can look at this nervous man and say, this person clearly has absolutely no idea where he is actually living. Despite all his time in residence here on Earth, he still does not truly know the fundamental laws of this country or its basic customs. What Epictetus means is that the man does not understand the laws of nature and the universe. The musician does not know what is permitted by nature, which is controlling your own actions, and what is not permitted, which is trying to control the opinions of others. Furthermore, Epictetus says, it is obvious that this man has never once taken the trouble to call on a philosophical lawyer, someone who could tell him the truth and clearly explain exactly how things actually operate here in reality. It is ironic, because in his everyday business life, this same man would never blindly sign a legal contract without first knowing how to draft one properly himself, or at least hiring somebody who does know how. He is certainly not casual about his finances. He would never blindly sign for heavy loans or offer personal guarantees without consulting an expert. But Epictetus notes, when it comes to the true business of living his life, when it comes to his deepest desires, his strong aversions, his sudden impulses, and his grand plans and life projects, he just recklessly applies himself to all of these things without the benefit of any philosophical or legal counsel whatsoever. How do I know this is true? Epictetus asks. I know it because I watch how he lives. He constantly wants things that he simply cannot have, and he desperately does not want things that he cannot possibly refuse or avoid. The worst part is, he is not even aware that he is doing this. He fundamentally does not know the difference between his own true possessions, which are his choices and his mind, and the possessions of others, which is the outside world. Because Epictetus reasons, if he actually did know that difference, he would never be thwarted by the world and he would never be disappointed. And most importantly for our topic, he would never be nervous. Just think about it logically, Epictetus says. We are never filled with true fear except when we are faced by things that we believe are genuinely bad. And we are not even scared by those bad things, as long as it remains completely in our own power to avoid them. So if we follow Stoic philosophy and accept that all external things are neither truly good nor truly bad, and if we also accept that everything within our own sphere of choice is completely in our power, cannot be taken away by anyone, and cannot be imposed on us without our own compliance, then what exactly is left in the world to be nervous about? Absolutely nothing. Yet look at how we actually behave. We agonize constantly over the health of our body, the state of our money, or what the emperor is going to decree tomorrow. We fret over all these externals, but we never agonize about anything going on inside us. I mean, do we ever lie awake at night worrying whether we are going to make a simple error in judgment? No, because our judgment is entirely under our own control. Do we panic about having an unnatural urge? No, again, because we know we can choose not to act on it. So Epictetus advises his students, if you see someone looking pale and trembling with nerves, you should act just like a skilled doctor. When a doctor sees a patient with yellow skin, he immediately diagnoses liver trouble. In the same way, when you see a nervous person, you should diagnose their soul. You should say to yourself, this poor man's desires and aversions are deeply unhealthy. They are not functioning properly. In fact, they are infected. Because Epictetus insists, absolutely nothing else can logically account for his sudden change in color, his nervous shivering, his uncontrollably chattering teeth, and this constant fretting and nervous shifting from one foot to the other. It is all a symptom of a diseased will. All of this perfectly explains a famous historical example. It explains why Zeno, the great founder of Stoicism, was absolutely not nervous at all about his high-profile meeting with King Antigonus. Why was he not scared? Because the things that Zeno truly valued, his own character and choices, Antigonus had absolutely no power over. And as a true philosopher, Zeno cared absolutely nothing for the wealth, status, and external things that the powerful king did actually command. In fact, Epictetus points out, it was King Antigonus who was deeply anxious before their meeting. And naturally so. The king desperately wanted to make a good impression on the famous philosopher, and making a good impression on someone else is something that is always fundamentally beyond our own control. Zeno, for his part, had absolutely no wish or need to please the king. As Epictetus reminds us, no true expert ever needs or seeks validation from a mere amateur. And this brings Epictetus back to his students. He asks them directly, so what do I need your approval for? You do not know the true measure of a man. You have not spent the time or studied to learn what makes a good or a bad person in reality, and how each one actually gets that way. Given this profound ignorance of human nature, Epictetus concludes, it is no wonder that you are not actually a good person yourself yet. The student, feeling a bit defensive, immediately asks, how do you make that out? Why do you say I am not a good person? Epictetus explains that it is simply not in a truly good and wise person's nature to constantly grieve, complain, or whine about what might happen. They do not go pale with fear, tremble in their boots, and anxiously say to themselves, oh no, what kind of hearing or reception will this powerful man give me today? Epictetus then bluntly addresses the student. You idiot, that is his concern. You must not concern yourself with other people's business. It is entirely his own moral problem, not yours, if he decides to receive you badly or treat you poorly. The student, seeing the logic in this, admits, true. Epictetus drives the point home, and you absolutely cannot suffer moral harm for another person's fault. Their bad behavior stains their soul, not yours, so you must never worry about the behavior of others. The student tries a different angle. All right, I understand that, he says, but I still worry about how I personally will talk to him. Epictetus replies, what is stopping you? Cannot you talk to him in any way you choose to? The student confesses, I am afraid that in the heat of the moment I might slip up and say something gauche or awkward. Epictetus uses a simple analogy to show why this fear is unfounded. Look, he says, when you sit down and are about to spell the simple name Dion, are you ever afraid that you will suddenly slip up and misspell it? The student answers no. And why not? Epictetus asks. It is simply because you have had years of practice in writing that specific name. True, the student agrees. And Epictetus continues, you would have the exact same level of ease and confidence if you were just reading the name out loud. Yes, of course, says the student. The underlying reason for this, Epictetus explains, is that any kind of rigorous discipline or training naturally brings with it a great measure of strength and solid confidence in the corresponding arts. If you practice writing, you become confident in writing. Now, apply this to your current situation. You have had extensive practice in the art of speaking. Think about it. What else did they spend all those years teaching you at philosophy school? The student replies, well, they taught me how to construct syllogisms and how to analyze and navigate changing, complex arguments. Exactly, Epictetus says. But why did they teach you all of that if not to make you highly accomplished in the art of real-world conversation? And when I say accomplished, I mean that you should be refined in your speech, completely assured in your logic, highly intelligent, not easily flustered by a hostile crowd, and not easily refuted by a weak argument. And on top of all that training, you are supposed to be completely fearless. The student nods, agreed. Well then, Epictetus concludes, painting a vivid picture, if you have all this advanced philosophical training, you are basically in the position of a highly trained, heavily armored soldier sitting on horseback, and you are about to face a mere untrained foot soldier. Furthermore, you are fighting him on logical ground that you have gone over 1,000 times in school and that he has never even seen before. You have every single advantage. And still, you are telling me that you are nervous. The student, suddenly bringing the conversation back to brutal Roman reality, cries out, yes, I am nervous, because, unlike a mere foot soldier, this powerful man can literally have me killed. Epictetus's response is sharp and unforgiving. He tells the student, well then, if you are that afraid, speak the truth, you sorry specimen. Do not put on false airs and dare to call yourself a true philosopher. You must honestly face up to who your betters are in this world. As long as you maintain this intense, fearful attachment to your physical body, you must be ready to cower and submit to anyone or anything that possesses superior physical force. He then contrasts the student's cowardice with the courage of the great philosophers of the past. As for truly knowing how to speak in public under extreme pressure, he notes, Socrates must have thoroughly practiced the art. Just look at his historical record. Look at his defiant and principled answer to the 30 tyrants when they ordered him to commit an injustice. Look at his brilliant, unflinching defense before the hostile jury that eventually sentenced him to death. And look at the calm, profound conversations he had with his friends while sitting in a jail cell waiting to be executed. The famous cynic philosopher Diogenes, too, had clearly practiced how to speak fearlessly. Just witness the completely free, easy, and almost dismissive way he talked to the most powerful men in the world, like Alexander the Great and Philip of Macedon. He spoke with that exact same fearless attitude to the ruthless pirates who kidnapped him, and even to the master to whom those pirates eventually sold him as a slave. But as for you, Epictetus tells the cowardly student, you should just go back to your safe, quiet desk work and do not ever leave it. Settle back comfortably in your little alcove, think up some new theoretical syllogisms, and just share them with your equally timid friends. You are plainly not cut out for the difficult and dangerous role of a true public leader. With that sharp rebuke, the discourse ends. The next section, which is titled To Naso, begins with a brief scene. A prominent visitor from Rome named Naso was attending one of Epictetus's lectures along with his son. During the lecture, Epictetus demonstrated a point, said, "This is the way I teach," and then abruptly stopped talking entirely. The Roman man, eager to hear more philosophy, pleaded with him to please go on. But Epictetus explained his silence by stating a general truth. The actual day-to-day learning process is inherently boring to anyone who is completely new to it and unfamiliar with the intricacies of the skill being taught. He elaborates on this idea by comparing philosophy to everyday trades. He says that when a skill produces a finished product, that final product leaves absolutely no doubt as to its utility, and most finished products are even quite pleasing or visually attractive to look at. For instance, he points out, it is not very exciting at all to just sit and watch the slow, repetitive, daily progress of a shoemaker as he works in his shop. But the finished shoes he creates are not only incredibly useful, they are also usually aesthetically pleasing to a certain degree. Or consider the training and work of a carpenter. It is incredibly tedious for people who are not carpenters themselves to just sit and watch him measuring, sawing, and sanding wood all day long. But the beautiful, finished cabinetry that he eventually produces completely justifies all that slow, boring effort. Music, Epictetus suggests, makes his point most obviously of all. If you sit in and attend a beginner's music lesson, you will probably think it involves the most repetitive, monotonous, and annoying training imaginable. But the final results, the beautiful songs played by a master, please and entertain absolutely everyone. In exactly the same way Epictetus implies, the daily training of a philosopher, the logical exercises, the self-examination, can seem very dry and tedious to an outsider like Naso. But what is the beautiful, finished product of all this philosophical training? Epictetus explains. In our school of Stoicism, we picture the philosopher's ultimate goal more or less as follows. We want to bring our own internal will completely in line with external events so that nothing happens contrary to our wishes, and, conversely, that absolutely nothing fails to happen that we actually want to happen. If you pursue this philosophical goal, Epictetus explains, the ultimate reward is profound. Neither your desires nor your aversions will ever fail in their aims. You will always get what you want because you only want what is entirely within your control. And furthermore, because of this internal peace, we will be able to flawlessly fulfill all of our various roles in society. Whether you are acting in your role as a son, a father, a brother, a citizen, a man, a woman, a neighbor, a fellow voyager on a journey, a ruler, or someone being ruled, you will be able to perform all of these duties completely without conflict, without fear, and without any rancor or bitterness toward others. That, Epictetus says, is exactly how we picture the true philosopher's ultimate goal. It is a beautiful image, but the next, much harder step is finding out how to actually make it a reality. He uses another practical analogy. We all easily realize that becoming a skilled carpenter or a ship's pilot requires some serious formal training. Is it therefore unreasonable to suppose that it will take something more than just a vague, casual desire to become a good person? Is it so crazy to think that a student of philosophy will also have to sit down and formally learn a few things of his own? Obviously not. So, we must look for some reliable guidance to start our training. The great philosophers say that the very first, foundational thing a person needs to learn is that God, or the divine intelligence of the universe, exists. Furthermore, you must learn that this divine intelligence actively governs the world, and that we cannot keep our actions secret from it. In fact, even our most private thoughts and inner inclinations are entirely known to this divine presence. Once you have grasped that, Epictetus says, the very next thing you need to learn about is the specific nature of that divine intelligence. Why? Because we will have to actively imitate the gods if we truly intend to obey them and win their favor. The logic is simple. If the divine nature is inherently trustworthy, then we must strive to be trustworthy in our own lives. If the divine nature is entirely free, then we must also strive to be completely free. And likewise, if the divine nature is benevolent, kind, and forgiving, then we must be too. Ultimately, absolutely all of our thoughts and all of our outward behavior should be deliberately shaped and modeled on that perfect divine standard. So Epictetus asks the Roman visitor Naso, where should we begin this difficult training? If you are truly prepared for it, he says, I would tell you that you need to begin at the very bottom, by deeply understanding the true meaning of the words we use every day. The Roman visitor is understandably taken aback and insulted by this. He asks, are you actually implying that at present I do not even understand the meaning of words? Epictetus calmly and directly replies, I am. The visitor protests, then how come I am able to use them so easily every day in conversation? Epictetus answers with a blunt, somewhat insulting comparison. He says, you use words in the exact same way that illiterate people make use of written signs. They might recognize a shape to get around, but they cannot actually read the letters. Or, you use them the way cattle make use of their physical senses to graze. In other words, it is entirely possible to use a tool on a superficial, functional level without fully and truly understanding what it actually means at its core. But Epictetus offers, if you stubbornly think that you really do understand the profound meaning of words, let us play a game. Let us take a few common words right now and put them to the test to see each other's true level of understanding. The Roman visitor, his pride wounded, balks at this idea. He says indignantly, but I am a fully grown man. I have already been through the wars and lived a full, successful life. Forcing me to take vocabulary exams at my age is an insulting imposition. Epictetus replies with a touch of heavy sarcasm. Do I not know it, he says, and after all, it is perfectly obvious that you are not sitting here in my classroom because you actually think you lack for anything. With all your wealth and life experience, what could you even possibly imagine that you actually need? You are a wealthy man. You have a family, children, and probably a wife, and you own a sufficient number of slaves. You are so prominent that even the emperor himself knows you. You have a wide circle of friends in Rome. You diligently see to all your civic duties, and you perfectly know the worldly arts of how to reward your friends and how to get even with your enemies. From a worldly perspective, what more could you possibly want? But Epictetus challenges him. Well, what if I were to show you that despite having all those worldly things, the only things you are actually missing are the actual keys to true happiness? What if I were to tell you that your entire life to date has been passionately devoted to absolutely everything, except the one thing it actually ought to be devoted to? And what if I were to crown all of that off by looking you in the eye and saying that, despite all your worldly success, you fundamentally do not know what God is, or what man is, or what truly makes a thing good or bad? And if that is not too much for your pride to endure, what if I told you that you do not even truly know who you yourself are either? If I said all of that to you, Epictetus asks the Roman, could you actually put up with me? Could you humbly take the criticism, swallow your pride, and remain here to learn? Hardly, Epictetus answers for him. You would be deeply offended and you would storm out of here in a huge huff and a hurry. And yet Epictetus points out, even if I said all those harsh things, I would not have actually done you any real harm. Blaming me for pointing out your ignorance is no more logical than blaming a mirror when it honestly shows a plain person exactly what they look like. Or think about a doctor. Is a doctor being mean or malicious if he examines a patient and tells them, look, you may think this symptom is insignificant, but the truth is, you are really sick. There will be absolutely no rich food for you today, you can only drink water. When a doctor says that, absolutely no one thinks, how rude. We accept the harsh truth because it is meant to heal us. But in philosophy, it is completely different. If you try to act like a doctor of the soul and say to someone, your inner desires are deeply unhealthy, your powers of aversion are dangerously weak, your life plans are completely incoherent, your daily impulses are constantly at odds with nature, and your entire internal system of values is entirely false and confused. Well, they do not thank you for the diagnosis. Instead, off they go, angrily storming away and loudly alleging that you are slandering them. To explain why people are so blind to this, Epictetus offers a profound metaphor. He says that our human condition here on earth can be compared to a giant, bustling festival or market fair. At this festival, cattle are brought in specifically to be sold, and the vast majority of the people who attend the festival are there simply to either buy or sell those cattle and make a profit. But scattered among the crowd, there are always a few rare individuals who come to the festival simply to observe and understand. They want to see exactly how and why the festival is organized. They want to know exactly who put it on, and they want to understand for what ultimate purpose it exists. It is exactly the same in this grand festival of human life, Epictetus says. Some people are just like the cattle at the fair. They care for absolutely nothing except their daily feed. He tells his audience directly, those of you who are entirely focused on accumulating wealth, acquiring property, managing a large household, and chasing public status, you must realize that all of this is ultimately nothing more than cattle fodder. It is just feed. But thankfully, a few rare people in the crowd of humanity are actually capable of deeper reflection. They look around at the universe and want to know, what exactly is this world, and who is the one who runs it? Because, they logically deduce, someone definitely must run it. We know from everyday experience that no human country or private estate can function properly for any length of time without its governor or its steward actively managing things. Therefore, when we look at the universe, this grand design that is so incredibly big, so unimaginably beautiful and so obviously well planned, how can we possibly believe that it just runs on its own, completely haphazardly, without a guiding intelligence? Okay, they say, let us assume then that there is indeed a ruler of this grand festival. But if so, who exactly is he, and how does he actually exercise his control over the world? Furthermore, what are we humans actually like in relation to him? We are told that we are his descendants, but if that is true, for what specific purpose were we actually born? Surely, if we are his creations, there must be some sort of meaningful link between us and him, some profound connection that we are meant to discover and honor. These deep, philosophical questions, Epictetus explains, are exactly what occupies the minds of those few rare individuals at the festival. They choose to spend all of their spare time at the fair not haggling over prices or eating fodder, but rather quietly seeing and learning as much as they possibly can about the true nature of the festival before the inevitable time comes for them to get up and leave this life. Naturally, Epictetus points out, these thoughtful individuals are ruthlessly laughed at by the vast majority of the crowd. They are mocked in much the exact same way that the aggressive vendors who are busy making money at the games will loudly laugh at the passive spectators who are only there to watch and observe. And he adds with a final touch of humor, I suppose that if the cattle themselves had opinions, they would certainly make fun of anyone at the fair who was interested in anything other than just eating the green grass. With that, Epictetus concludes his remarks to Naso and begins a new discourse. This next section is addressed to a very specific type of person, those people who cling stubbornly and irrationally hard to certain decisions they have made, regardless of the circumstances. He begins by pointing out a common misunderstanding of Stoic principles. Some people, he says, suppose that the virtue of resolution, which means sticking firmly to your choices, must be absolute. They combine this idea with the fundamental Stoic fact that nature made the human will completely free and untrammeled, while everything else in the world is blocked, checked, slavish, and external. From these two ideas, they falsely conclude that our decisions should all be honored absolutely, to the extreme extent of never, ever backing off from a chosen course of action even a single inch, no matter what happens. Epictetus firmly corrects this. No, he says, the absolute prerequisite is that the decision first must be a well-founded and rational one. He uses an analogy of physical health to explain. I mean, he says, I certainly like a human body to be strong, but I want it to be strong with the healthy, natural energy that comes as a direct result of good health and proper training. I do not want the kind of wild, uncontrollable strength that comes as a result of some manic mental disorder or fever. If you are taking immense pride in the fact that you possess the restless, manic energy of a lunatic, Epictetus says he would have to look at you and say, friend, you desperately need a therapist. What you have is not true strength at all, but rather a dangerous kind of mental infirmity. In a slightly different sense, Epictetus warns, This exact same ailment often affects the minds of people who misunderstand and misconstrue the true nature of our Stoic philosophy. To illustrate this, he tells a personal story about a friend of his. This friend, acting entirely on his own without consulting anyone, arbitrarily decided one day that he was simply going to starve himself to death. When Epictetus finally heard about this, the man was already 3 full days into his fast. Concerned, Epictetus immediately went to see him and asked him to rationally explain exactly why he was doing this. The friend, weak but stubborn, simply replied, "I made my decision." Epictetus pressed him, saying, "Yes, you made your decision, but what actually drove you to it? Look, if it is genuinely the right decision, based on sound reasoning, then we are completely ready to sit by your side and help you make the passage out of this life. But if it was just a reckless, unfounded decision, then it should definitely be open to change." The friend stubbornly replied, "But as philosophers, we must stick with a decision once we make it." Epictetus threw his hands up in frustration. "For heaven's sake, man," he argued, "that rule only applies to sound, rational decisions. Following your logic, I suppose the next thing you will do is arbitrarily decide that it is night right now, in the middle of the day, and then refuse to change your mind simply because you do not want to. You will just sit there in the sunlight stubbornly repeating, 'We must stick with a decision.'" He urged his friend, "You must always begin with a firm, rational foundation. You have to carefully evaluate your decision first to see if it is actually valid. Only then will there be any legitimate basis for this rigid resolve of yours. If your initial foundation is rotten or crumbling, not a single thing should be built on top of it. In fact, the bigger and grander you try to make the building on a rotten foundation, the sooner the whole thing will inevitably collapse." Epictetus continued trying to reason with him, pointing out the tragic reality of his actions. "With absolutely no good reason, you're taking the life of an old, dear friend of mine, meaning yourself. You are a man who shares both cities with me, meaning both the big cosmic city of the universe and our small earthly community. And yet, while you are busy killing and doing away with an innocent man, all you can do is keep stubbornly repeating, 'We must stick with a decision.'" Epictetus then asked him a pointed question to highlight the absurdity. "If the random idea of killing me should ever suddenly occur to you, would this exact same principle apply, I wonder? Would you just kill me and refuse to change your mind?" Well, Epictetus tells his students, with great difficulty that man was finally prevailed upon to relent and break his fast. But he warns, there are some people in the world today whom there is just absolutely no persuading. Epictetus admits that he has finally come to truly understand an old saying which he did not fully appreciate until going through that experience. A fool cannot be convinced or even compelled to renounce his folly. And he adds a heartfelt plea. "God save me from fools who have acquired just a little bit of philosophy. There is absolutely no one in the world who is more difficult to reach." When someone stubbornly repeats, "I have made a decision," Epictetus points out that yes, so have raving lunatics. They make decisions all the time, but the more fixed and rigid their delusions become, the more intense medication they actually require. He advises that instead of acting like a stubborn lunatic, you should do what normal sick people do when they are unwell. They call on the doctor and humbly say to him, "Doctor, I am sick and I desperately need your help. I promise to faithfully follow whatever treatment you prescribe." Similarly, Epictetus says, "When a student comes to a philosopher, I expect to hear them say, 'I am lost in my life and I do not know what I should do. I have come to you specifically to find out.' But instead, what does he get? He gets people who arrogantly say, 'You can talk to me about absolutely anything else, but in this specific matter, my mind is completely made up.' To which Epictetus exasperatedly replies, 'What else am I possibly supposed to talk to you about? There is absolutely nothing more important to discuss right now than that very thing where your mind is so foolishly made up. Nothing is more important than that I cure you of this dangerous conviction that we must stick with a decision and never back down is some sort of absolute law. It is a very crude and simplistic rule. This kind of unyielding behavior is a sign of deranged, sick resolution, not healthy, rational strength. To highlight this, Epictetus gives another example of this kind of irrational dialogue. A stubborn person might say, "I want to die, even though I do not actually have to." Epictetus would naturally ask, "Why? What terrible thing has happened?" And the person would simply repeat, "I made that decision." To which Epictetus might wryly reply, "Well, it is certainly a good thing that it was not me you arbitrarily decided needed to go." He gives another example, perhaps about a student who refuses to work. The student says, "I do not take money for my services." "Why not?" Epictetus asks. "That was my decision," the student replies. Epictetus warns him, "You must realize that this kind of deep irrationality means that one day soon, the wind might blow a different direction, and you might well switch to eagerly accepting money. And you will probably announce it with the exact same degree of irrational passion, saying, 'This is my decision.'" He compares this kind of person to someone afflicted with certain shifting illnesses, which manifest as pain in different parts of the body at different times. It is exactly the same with an unhealthy mind. You can never guess what random view it will suddenly incline to next, and the real tragedy is when this pure arbitrariness is backed up and reinforced by a strong sense of purpose. When that happens, the mental illness becomes almost entirely past any help or healing. With that, Epictetus moves on to a new discourse titled, "We do not regularly put our beliefs about good and bad into practice." He begins this new section by conducting a rapid-fire quiz with his students, testing their basic Stoic knowledge. He asks, "Where does the true good lie?" The students correctly answer, "In the will." "And where does true evil lie?" "Also in the will," they reply. "And what about things that are neither good nor bad? Where do they lie?" The students confidently finish the sentence, "They lie in whatever is entirely external to the will." Epictetus says, "Very good, you know the theory perfectly," but he challenges them, "How many of you actually remember this truth once you step outside this classroom? Do any of you, when you are out on your own, actually practice formulating Stoic answers to the common, everyday impressions that hit you? Do you test them the way you smoothly provide answers in a simple logical drill in class?" He mimics a basic logic drill. "Is it day? Yes. Is it night then? No. Then are the stars odd or even in number?" And you answer, "I cannot say." He continues, "But what happens when you are confronted with something real, like a large sum of money? Are you actually trained to instinctively give the right Stoic response, which is, 'Money is not a true good'? Have you ever practically practiced giving real-world answers like this? Or is all of your extensive training confined entirely to theoretical sophisms and classroom logic puzzles?" Epictetus tells them that it should come as absolutely no surprise to them that they excel and surpass themselves in the specific areas where they are actually trained. But they get absolutely nowhere and fail completely in the areas of life that they have completely ignored. To make this clear, he brings up the example of a professional public speaker. This speaker is completely confident that he has written a very good speech. He has spent hours committing the whole thing to memory, and he knows he can deliver it smoothly and flawlessly. But despite all of this preparation, he still agonizes and worries before he goes on stage. Why? Because, Epictetus explains, it is not enough for this man to simply be competent at his craft. He also desperately hungers for the crowd's approval. This deep hunger means that, no matter how incredibly well-trained he might be in the technical art of public speaking, he has absolutely no training whatsoever in the philosophical business of handling praise and blame. Epictetus asks, when was this speaker ever seriously questioned as to what praise and blame actually are? When did he study the true nature of each one? Did he ever stop to ask whether all praise should actually be welcomed, and whether all criticism should automatically be shunned? Did he ever submit himself to any kind of rigorous moral training based on the answers to those deep questions? Of course, the answer is no. So Epictetus says, it is no wonder at all that, having applied himself so intensely to oratory. He is vastly better than all of his contemporaries in that specific field. But when it comes to controlling his emotions, he is absolutely no better than the unthinking mass of men in all the areas he has completely overlooked. He is exactly like the musician we discussed earlier. The musician who knows perfectly how to play his instrument, who sings beautifully, who dresses nicely for his performance, and yet still experiences crippling nerves right before taking the stage. He knows music perfectly, but he fundamentally does not know what a human audience is, or what good and bad reviews actually amount to in the grand scheme of life. Furthermore, he does not even truly understand his own anxiety. He does not know whether this anxiety is properly his own concern, or if it is based on another person's concern, and he certainly does not know whether it can actually be managed by his own mind. The sad result of all this ignorance is that his happiness is entirely dependent on the crowd. If he wins their loud applause, he struts and returns home completely full of himself. But if he happens to be booed, he immediately shrivels up as if all the air has been let out of a balloon, and he sinks down in despair, completely deflated. Epictetus turns to his students and says, "Our own case is very much the same as that speaker or that musician. What do we actually value in our daily lives? We value externals. What do we spend all our time looking after? We look after externals. And because we do this, Epictetus concludes, so of course, it is inevitable that we are going to experience constant fear and nervousness. When we are faced with external circumstances that we falsely judge to be genuinely bad, we simply cannot help but be frightened and highly apprehensive. When we feel this fear, what do? We cry out, 'Please, God, relieve me of my terrible anxiety.' To this, Epictetus gives a sharp, hilarious response. 'Listen, stupid,' he says, 'you already have hands. God gave them to you himself. When you pray for God to just take your anxiety away, you might as well get down on your knees and sincerely pray that your nose will not run.' A much better and more practical idea would be to just use your own hands, wipe your own nose, and forego the silly prayer entirely. The whole point," Epictetus continues, "is this. Is there not anything that God has already given you to deal with your present problem of anxiety? Of course there is. You already possess the inner gifts of courage, of fortitude, and of endurance. With powerful inner hands like these, do you honestly still need somebody else to come along and help wipe your nose for you? The real trouble," he explains, "is that we simply do not exercise these inner virtues, and we do not exercise them because we fundamentally do not appreciate their true value." He challenges his students. "Show me just one person who actually cares deeply about how they act, rather than just what they get. Show me someone for whom worldly success is actually less important than the honorable manner in which that success is achieved. While a person is out walking, whoever stops and gives any real, mindful thought to the physical act of walking itself, who actually pays attention to the careful process of planning a project, and not just the final outcome of the plan. Usually, Epictetus notes, if a plan works out and is successful, a person is completely overjoyed and boasts, 'Look at how well we planned it. Did I not tell you that, with brilliant brains like ours, this project could not possibly fail?' But if the exact same plan yields a different, unsuccessful result, that same person is left completely devastated, entirely incapable of even finding the words to rationally explain what just happened." He points out another common human behavior to prove his point. "No one in the history of the world," he says, "ever consults a prophet or a seer, or spends the entire night praying in a temple, out of genuine concern for the moral means of their actions, rather than just the material ends or outcomes. If you can find me just one single person like that," Epictetus says, "I desperately want to see him. This is exactly the kind of person that I have looked for a very long time, the true moral genius and the real aristocrat of the soul. I do not care at all if they happen to be young or old, just please find me one." So given all of this, how can we possibly wonder why we act the way we do? If we have completely squandered all of our attention and energy on pursuing material things, is it any surprise that we end up acting in a way that is mean, shameless, worthless, cowardly, and meek, basically a complete nightmare? We behave this way simply because we did not practice being virtuous, and we did not actually care about it. Epictetus suggests a radical shift in perspective. Rather than fearing external things like death or political exile, if we only feared the emotion of fear itself, then we would actually practice avoiding the internal things that we truly believe to be bad. As it is right now, he admits, when we are safely inside the philosophy classroom, we are fierce and incredibly fluent. We are remarkably quick to confidently answer any little theoretical question on these topics, and we are highly adept at logically drawing all the right conclusions. But the moment you force us to step outside and actually put those lofty principles into real-world practice, we are as good as completely lost. Just let any real danger start to loom on the horizon, and you will instantly discover what we have actually practiced and trained for all our lives, and it is not philosophy. Then Epictetus explains, because of our lifelong negligence in this area, we constantly and forever compound our own problems. By panicking, we actually make our situations out to be far, far worse in our minds than they actually are in reality. He offers a personal example of this kind of irrational fear. For instance, he says, whenever I happen to be traveling on board a ship, and I lean over the rail and gaze down into the deep water, or if I look all around me and see absolutely nothing but the vast ocean, I am suddenly gripped by sheer terror. My mind starts wildly imagining that if we happen to shipwreck, I will personally have to swallow all of this massive, endless sea. In his panic, he points out the absurdity of his fear. It completely fails to occur to my terrified mind that swallowing just about 3 pints of sea water will be more than enough to do me in. So, is it really the vast physical sea itself that actually terrifies me? No, of course not. It is entirely my own runaway imagination. He gives another relatable example. Again, whenever I happen to be caught in an earthquake, I am immediately prone to panic and picture the entire massive city coming down and crushing me. Whereas, in actual fact, a single falling brick is more than enough to dash my brains out and end my life. So Epictetus concludes, what is it that actually oppresses and scares us in these situations? It is our own thoughts, obviously, and nothing else. What is it that completely overwhelms people with grief when they are about to leave their friends, their family, their old haunts, and their comfortable, accustomed way of life? It is simply their thoughts about those things. He points to a familiar sight. I mean, just look at how children behave. Their beloved nanny leaves them for a moment, and they immediately begin to cry as if the world has ended. But if you just give them a piece of cake, they have instantly forgotten all about their missing nanny and are perfectly happy again. A student, perhaps feeling a bit insulted, might ask, are you seriously saying that we, as adult philosophers, should model our emotional behavior on how children act? Epictetus replies, no, not exactly, because I do not think that you, as a grown adult, actually need a physical piece of cake to feel better. What you need instead is correct, rational thoughts. And what exactly are those correct thoughts? The student asks. Epictetus lays out a daily practice. Every single day, you should actively put into action the philosophical ideas that specifically protect you against forming deep attachments to external things such as individual people, specific places, or human institutions. You must even guard against being too attached to your own physical body. You must remember the overarching law of God and keep it constantly front and center in your view. He details what this law entails. You must learn to look only to your own internal means and your own choices. You must leave absolutely everything that is not actually yours completely alone. You should certainly make use of whatever material advantages you happen to have right now, but you must not regret or complain about the ones that you were not allowed to have. And crucially, if any of those advantages or possessions are suddenly recalled by the universe, You must let go of them willingly and be genuinely grateful for the amount of time that you were permitted to enjoy them. You must do all of this unless, of course, you actually want to be just like a little child, crying pitifully for her nurse or her mother. After all, Epictetus argues, what real difference does it make what specific thing a person happens to be enslaved to if they feel they absolutely cannot live without it? You are fundamentally no different from a lovesick teenager mooning and obsessing over a girl when you yourself ache and pine for your familiar old haunts, your favorite social club, your old gang of friends, and your comfortable former way of life. It is all the same kind of slavery. He gives a concrete example of this kind of foolish attachment. Look, he says, here is someone who is completely distraught simply because he has had to move, and he will no longer be able to drink from the famous water of the Durst spring in Greece. But I ask you, is our local water here in Rome actually inferior somehow? The man replies, no, it is not that it is inferior, but I had just grown so used to drinking Durst's water. Epictetus shakes his head. Well, he says, you will simply get used to our Roman water in time. And knowing human nature, once you finally become used to it, the day may very well come when you have to leave Rome, and you will suddenly find yourself pining and crying for this water in turn. And in your grief over leaving, Epictetus mocks, you may even try your hand at dramatic poetry, imitating that famous line in a play by Euripides, crying out, "Ah, for Nero's baths and the sweet water of the Marcia aqueduct." This, Epictetus declares with a heavy dose of sarcasm, is exactly how human tragedy is born. Behold the birth of tragedy. It happens precisely when idiots come face to face with the normal, everyday vicissitudes and changes of life. Someone might complain and weep, "Oh, will I ever see Athens and the beautiful Acropolis again?" Epictetus shakes his head. "You poor fellow," he says, "are you really not satisfied with the magnificent things that you get to see every single day? Can you possibly hope for any better, more majestic vision than looking up at the sun, the moon, and the stars, or looking around at all the vast land and the sea?" Furthermore, he argues, if you truly appreciate how God governs all of these cosmic things, and if you realize that you actually carry that divine intelligence around inside your own mind, what real attraction can mere carved marble or fine human masonry still have for you? He pushes the logic to its ultimate conclusion. If you are this upset about leaving a city, think about what happens when you die. When it is finally time for you to leave the sun and the moon themselves behind, how exactly will you react then? Will you just sit down on the ground and cry, exactly like an infant? He demands to know if absolutely nothing that they heard and studied in philosophy school ever actually got through to them. Why did you ever falsely advertise yourself to the world as a Stoic philosopher, when you might have just honestly told everyone the truth? You should have said, "Well, I made it through a couple of basic primers, and then I read a little bit of Chrysippus to sound smart, but I hardly even crossed the very threshold of true philosophy." Epictetus challenges their right to claim the title. How can you possibly associate yourself with the great Socrates, who lived and died with such incredible courage and detachment, or with a man like Diogenes? He points out that you simply cannot imagine either of those great men ever being reduced to petty tears or throwing childish tantrums just because they were not going to get to see this particular man or that particular woman again. You cannot imagine them crying because they had to live in a foreign city like Susa or Ecbatana, rather than their preferred cities of Athens or Corinth. He uses a metaphor of a party to describe the philosopher's attitude toward life and its changing locations. Whoever has the inner freedom to exit the party at will the moment the fun begins to fade is highly unlikely to just stick around and be bored and miserable. Instead, he will stay at the party only as long as he is actually entertained, much like a child who is happily involved in playing a game. This kind of detached, free person, Epictetus notes, is hardly the kind of person who is going to suffer and endure the misery of permanent exile, or be broken by a sentence of exile that lasts until death. He tells his student bluntly, Like a growing child, it is high time you were finally weaned off of milk and started taking solid food. Or, put another, more direct way, it is time you finally stopped crying for your nurse and your mother. But a student might object, bringing up the feelings of others. But by leaving my friends and family behind, I make them terribly unhappy. Epictetus immediately corrects this false assumption. Do you really think that you yourself are the actual cause of their unhappiness? No, absolutely not. The true cause of their emotional disturbance is exactly the same as the cause of yours. It is their own internal judgments. He advises the student, overhaul your own judgments first, and then, if your friends are smart, they will eventually overhaul theirs. Otherwise, if they refuse, their unhappiness will be entirely of their own making, and it is not your responsibility. Listen, Epictetus urges them. As the old saying goes, it is crisis time right now. You must make a final, desperate, all-out effort to finally gain your inner freedom and true tranquility. You must make the effort to truly be a Stoic. Lift up your head high, just like a person who has finally been released from a lifetime of slavery. You must dare to look up, face God directly, and say, "From now on, use me in this world however you like. I am of one mind with you, and in my free will I am your peer. Whatever you decide for my life, I will not shrink from it. You may put me wherever you like, and you may cast me in any role regardless. Whether you make me an officer or a private citizen, a rich man or a starving pauper, whether you keep me here at home or send me overseas, it does not matter." Why? Because, Epictetus explains, all of those different roles and circumstances are ultimately just so many different opportunities for you to justify God's ways to man. You do this by demonstrating, through your calm behavior, exactly how little those external circumstances actually amount to in the end. But no, Epictetus sighs, you do not do that. Instead, you just keep yourself safely hidden indoors, sitting around and waiting for your mother to come and feed you. Think about the great heroes of the past. What would the mighty Heracles have actually been if he had just hung around the house all day, afraid to leave? He would have been just like Eurystheus, the weak, cowardly king who hid in a jar. He would not have been Heracles at all. Think about how many true friends and noble companions Heracles made precisely as a consequence of traveling all over the dangerous world. But of all those friends, none was ever closer to him than Zeus himself, which is exactly why Heracles was rightly believed to be the son of God. It was in direct obedience to Zeus that he courageously went around the world wiping out crime, monsters, and injustice. Now Epictetus admits, you are obviously no Heracles. You do not have the superhuman power to go around clearing away the physical ills and monsters of other people. No, you are not even a lesser hero like Theseus. Otherwise, you might at least be able to relieve the local region of Attica of its troubles. Therefore, since you cannot save the world, you must instead focus on setting your own internal house in order. You must act the hero inside your own mind. You must violently cast out of your mind, not mythological monsters like Procrustes or Siren, but the real internal monsters. Sorrow, fear, lust, envy, spite, greed, petulance, and overindulgence. And getting rid of these terrible internal monsters, Epictetus reminds them, also requires looking directly to God for help, trusting in Him alone, and willingly submitting yourself to His divine direction. If you are ultimately not willing to do this, if you choose to remain all tears and nervous agitation, then your fate is sealed. You will inevitably end up serving someone who is simply physically more powerful than you. You will continue to frantically look outside yourself for happiness, and you are absolutely fated to never, ever find it. And the tragic reason for that failure is simply because you are stubbornly looking for happiness in the completely wrong place, constantly forgetting to look inside yourself, which is the only place where true happiness actually lies.